The funeral hall was silent, heavy with grief and whispers. A billionaire had just been declared gone, and the city's most powerful people had gathered to say their final goodbye. But just as the ceremony was about to begin, a quiet janitor standing in the back suddenly rushed forward and shouted that the man inside the coffin was not dead. At first, everyone thought he had lost his mind. Security moved quickly. Angry voices filled the room, and people demanded that the janitor be removed immediately. But the determination in his eyes made the room pause for just a moment, because deep down, he knew something everyone else had missed. The hall belonged to one of the most successful businessmen in the country, a man known for building companies that changed entire industries. His passing had the news channels had been repeating the same story for hours. Sudden collapse, rushed to the hospital, doctors unable to revive him. Within a day, preparations for the funeral had begun. Wealthy investors, politicians, and family members sat quietly in the front rows while cameras from outside media outlets waited for the ceremony to end. At the entrance stood Marcus, a janitor who worked in the building. Most people had never noticed him before. He spent his days quietly cleaning hallways and empty offices. Yet that morning something had been bothering him since the moment he saw the coffin arrive. Earlier that week he had been assigned to clean the executive floor of the Billionaire's headquarters. While working late one evening, he had briefly crossed paths with the businessman himself. The billionaire had been speaking about a rare medical condition he had recently been diagnosed with, something that could make his pulse nearly impossible to detect during certain episodes. Marcus had not fully understood the medical explanation at the time, but the memory returned the moment he heard the news of the billionaire's sudden death. When he saw the closed coffin being carried into the hall, a deep uneasiness settled inside him. Something did not feel right. Others believed Marcus kept remembering the businessman's calm voice, explaining how his body sometimes slowed down in strange ways. Memory refused to leave him. As the ceremony began, a speaker stepped forward to talk about the billionaire's achievements and legacy. Music played in the background while mourners wiped their eyes, but Marcus kept staring at the coffin. His hands trembled slightly as a thought pushed through his mind again and again. What if the doctors had been wrong? What if the condition the billionaire mentioned had fooled everyone? Suddenly Marcus stepped forward, his voice breaking through the quiet room. He said the man might still be alive and begged them to check one more time. Gasps filled the hall. Several guests turned around. Security guards immediately moved toward him, assuming he was causing trouble during a serious ceremony. Few people shouted for him to be removed, but Marcus refused to back down. His voice shook as he explained what he had heard days earlier. He spoke about the medical condition and how the billionaire had described moments where his body slowed down, so much that machines sometimes struggled to detect signs. The room grew tense as some people dismissed the idea, while others began whispering among themselves. Finally, one of the family members hesitated. The doubt in Marcus's voice sounded too sincere to ignore. After a long moment of uneasy silence, they called a doctor who had been present at the ceremony to double-check the situation before continuing. The coffin was carefully opened. The entire room leaned forward. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The billionaire lay perfectly still, his face pale and calm. The doctor prepared to confirm what everyone already believed. But then something unexpected happened. The doctor leaned closer and noticed the faintest movement near the billionaire's chest. It was so slight that it could easily have been missed. Tweety trare proper curl per termi. For a moment the doctor froze, then quickly asked for medical equipment to be brought in. The room exploded with confusion as whispers turned into stunned murmurs. Marcus stood there, heart pounding, barely breathing himself as he watched the doctor check again. Seconds later, the doctor looked up with wide eyes and said something that sent shock through the entire hall. There was still a heartbeat. Panic and disbelief swept across the crowd as emergency services were called immediately. Billionaire was rushed out of the hall while people stared in stunned silence. Only moments earlier they had been preparing to say goodbye forever. Now they were witnessing something no one could explain. And in the middle of the chaos, the quiet janitor who everyone had tried to remove was suddenly the only person in the room who had seen it coming. The ambulance doors closed and raced toward the hospital, leaving behind a crowd that could hardly process what had just happened. Reporters outside quickly picked up the shocking development, spreading the story across the city within minutes. The most surprising part of the story had not happened yet. Hours later, the hospital corridor was filled with anxious family members and executives waiting for updates. Doctors worked carefully to stabilize them, explaining that his rare medical condition had slowed his vital signs so dramatically that it had created the illusion of death. If Marcus had not spoken up at that exact moment, the outcome could have been unthinkable. Inside the recovery room, machines monitored the billionaire's breathing while doctors watched closely. Slowly, his condition began to stabilize. News of the near tragedy spread. Everyone wanted to know how a janitor had been the one person who recognized the truth. Meanwhile, Marcus sat quietly in the waiting area, unsure whether he should even be there. To him, he had only followed his instincts. He never expected attention or praise. Yet within hours several people approached him, thanking him for his courage to speak up when everyone else had stayed silent. Late that evening, something remarkable happened. The billionaire slowly opened his eyes. Doctors immediately rushed to check his condition while relief swept through the room. The family members who had feared the worst could hardly believe it. Word spread through the hospital halls that he had regained consciousness. When he finally became strong enough to speak, the first thing he asked was a simple question. He wanted to know who had stopped the funeral. When Marcus was brought into the room, he looked nervous, almost embarrassed by the attention. But the billionaire recognized him instantly as the quiet janitor from the building. Weak smile, he thanked Marcus for trusting his memory and speaking up when it mattered most. Trust mine. The room fell silent as the billionaire explained that the medical condition he had mentioned days earlier had caused similar episodes before, but never this severe. Doctors later confirmed that the slowed heartbeat had fooled initial tests, creating a tragic misunderstanding. What happened next surprised everyone. The billionaire insisted that Marcus had not only saved his life, but had also shown courage that few people possessed. In front of his family and closest advisors, he made a decision that would change Marcus's life forever. He offered him a new opportunity that would allow the humble janitor to build a future far beyond the quiet hallways he once cleaned. Marcus stood there speechless, still processing everything that had happened. Just that morning he had walked into work expecting another ordinary day. Now he had become the reason a powerful man was still alive. And across the city, people could not stop talking about the moment when a single voice in a crowded funeral hall had changed everything.